What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you 5 reasons to buy the Samsung Galaxy A13 in 2022. Now this phone, as the name suggests, is the successor to the Samsung Galaxy A12 that came out in the beginning of 2021. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you my 5 favorite things about this phone to help you decide whether or not it's the right one for you. But with all that being said, let's get started. So my first reason to buy the Samsung Galaxy A13 in 2022 is the battery. With this phone, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 15 watt fast charging, so that's a really huge battery. So if you want a phone with a lot of battery life, both throughout the day and down the road in terms of longevity, then the Samsung Galaxy A13 is a great choice for you. With this phone, you're going to get a ton of battery life throughout the day, so if you're not around a charger all the time, this is going to be a great advantage. And then down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, you're not going to notice it nearly as quickly with this phone, because with a 5000 mAh battery, you're starting out with so much more battery life than you need, probably multiple days worth of battery life. So as it starts to wear out, you're not going to be affected by it nearly as quickly as you would with, say, an iPhone 13 that has a much smaller battery. Now the other cool thing about this phone's battery is the fast charging. At 15 watts, sure, it's not the best fast charging in the world, but I will say from experience, it definitely does make a difference, especially if you have something like one of those really strong car chargers and you don't always have a lot of time to charge up your phone. It will save you a little bit of time. My second reason to buy the Samsung Galaxy A13 in 2022 is the display. With this phone, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 400, an aspect ratio of 20:9, and a screen to body ratio of about 83.2%. So the really unique thing about this phone's display, for this price range at least, is the 1080p resolution. Usually in an entry-level phone under $200, you're probably only going to be getting 720p, but with this phone we do have a 1080p resolution, so it's going to give you a much sharper, crisper image. So if you're consuming content, whether you're streaming videos, viewing photos, playing games, whatever you're doing, you're going to get a much better experience. The image in general is going to look a lot better, and in addition to just the resolution, the colors on this phone look really nice and bold, and the brightness is pretty decent too. We got some okay viewing angles, maybe not as good as something like an AMOLED display, but it still does work, especially again for a phone in this price range, because I have seen quite a bit worse. I do think this phone does have a pretty good size as well. At 6.6 inches, it's not the biggest display you can get, but at the same time, it is going to give you the benefits of a larger display without the inconvenience of having a phone that's just too big. So if you're doing something like streaming videos, reading, whatever you're doing, things are going to show up larger on the display and be easier to see, and the dimensions are pretty good too. With an aspect ratio of 20:9, we're getting a pretty tall and narrow form factor, so when you're streaming videos in landscape mode, for example, you're going to get a more immersive experience, and when you're doing something like reading, you'll be able to fit a lot more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, while not having anything fancy like an AMOLED or a 90Hz refresh rate, if you're looking for an affordable phone with a 1080p resolution and just a good looking display overall, the Samsung Galaxy A13 is definitely a pretty good option. Now my third reason to buy the Samsung Galaxy A13 in 2022 is the camera. To give you a quick rundown of the camera setup, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. To give you an idea of what this camera can do, here's a photo taken with the front facing camera. As you can see, I was using portrait mode and it does work decently well. Overall, it's not the best front facing camera in the world, but the colors do look pretty good, and in general, if you want to take a photo for social media, something like that, it will get the job done. Now on the back of the phone, we got a quad camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So feature wise, this phone has pretty much everything. So you can get close up detailed images with a macro camera, and you can take wider angle, scenery, skyline pics, whatever you want with the ultra wide camera. And with a really powerful main camera, you can get some pretty good photos overall. To give you an idea of what this camera setup can do, here's some photos taken with the main camera. Definitely pretty decent, maybe not at the level of a $1,000 flagship phone, but for an entry-level phone, I do think these photos are pretty good. The details look pretty decent, the colors are nice and bright, and overall, I would definitely say this phone can take photos that you can use for social media, stuff like that. So while you're probably not going to be using this phone for professional photography, in most cases, it will get the job done. Now here's a photo taken with the ultra-wide camera. Again, maybe not the level of something like a $1,000 flagship phone, but for an entry-level phone, especially in the ultra-wide camera department, the photo is pretty good. There's obviously a little distortion here, probably goes without saying, but at the same time, if you do want to get the occasional wider angle for maybe a skyline picture or maybe some scenery, something like that, the ultra-wide camera does do a pretty decent job. Now here's a photo taken with the macro camera. Same kind of thing, of course there is better out there, but for a more entry-level phone, I do think this phone does do a pretty good job. Now here's a photo taken with the rear camera using portrait mode. As you can see, just like with the front-facing camera, portrait mode does work pretty well with this phone, and I know that kind of thing is really popular for stuff like Instagram, so if you are taking your photos primarily for social media, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A13 is not a bad choice. So in general, I am pretty impressed with the camera quality of this phone, and I'm glad that we have pretty much all the features. Sure, it's not going to be as good as something like the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, and certainly nowhere near the quality of a flagship phone like an S22 Ultra, but at the same time, if you just want to take photos you can keep for social media or something like that, for a more affordable phone, the Samsung Galaxy A13 does do a really good job. Now my fourth reason to buy the Samsung Galaxy A13 in 2022 is because it has NFC. Now in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay, Samsung Pay, Apple Pay, all that. So if you do like to use those tap and pay features, you'll be happy to know that with the Samsung Galaxy A13, you can absolutely do that. Now in 2022, this feature, in my opinion, should be a feature pretty much every phone has, but unfortunately it's still not that way. There are plenty of phones in this price range and actually way above it that don't have the feature. In fact, Motorola apparently just released the first Moto G phone that actually has NFC, but before that there were plenty of Motorola phones that were easily double the price of this phone that didn't have NFC, and since that feature is more popular now than ever, I do think it's an important feature that any smartphone should have. Now my fifth reason to buy the Samsung Galaxy A13 in 2022 is the storage. With this phone, we're getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and for most people, that's pretty much all you're gonna need. Right now, I have all kinds of stuff on this phone: social media apps, streaming platforms, travel stuff, utilities, and I even have a fair amount of games on here that I never play. And the best thing about all this is that despite how much stuff I have on this phone, it's really not taking up that much space. As you can see right now, we're using about 26.13 gigabytes, and that's only 40% of the total storage. Now imagine if this phone only had 32 gigabytes of storage. At that point, I would be using almost all of it and have no space left for anything else. And the funny thing is, while 64 gigabytes in this price range isn't uncommon, there are plenty of phones in this price range that only have 32 gigabytes. So even if you're just an average user, I do think 32 gigabytes in 2022 is just a little low. With apps, the system, pretty much everything getting larger and larger as time goes on and taking up more and more space, it's always good to have at least a little extra storage. And with this phone, we're not only getting 64 gigabytes, which again is probably going to be enough, but if it's not, if you have a lot of photos and videos, stuff like that, you can also use a microSD card to expand the storage even more. Now sure, if you're a power user, if you have a bunch of different apps like 100 gigabytes worth, whatever, then of course you're going to want more storage than this. But again, for the average user, I do think 64 gigabytes is plenty of space, and for this price range, it's definitely a pretty good value. But those were 5 reasons to buy the Samsung Galaxy A13 in 2022. Now, of course, there are more than 5 reasons to buy this phone, but there are also lots of reasons why you might not want it. So if you want to learn more about that, be sure to check out my full review and other videos about this phone on the channel. But I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you found the information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. But as always, I will see you in the next video.